Lily Gladstone. I love you too. That was a lovely reception. It's an audience of actors, so I have to start with the audition process. You met with Ellen Lewis. Tell us, how did it go?
Yeah, Ellen was wonderful. This was in October 2019. I went in, and it was a very candid conversation where she told me how high interest was. She, because she's sensitive to actors, kind of warned me of, like, I don't know, maybe some of the things I might hear elsewhere that would put me in my head about it or make me feel not confident about it. I mean, one thing that actually gave me quite a bit of confidence in the film is she did tell me that they were going to do a locals casting call in Osage Nation before they formally auditioned actors. So it was nice that she brought me in and let me know the interest level was high, because that also gives you the benefit of really diving into, like, the character research and turning up all the extra things that maybe just the first read of the book, which I had already done at that point, didn't turn up. And being a native actor, I was discovered because a film that was being made locally decided to cast locally rather than pulling talent from LA to appease producers. And I was grateful for that. So it gave me a lot of confidence that the film was trying to do it the right way from the get-go, which is always kind of a little bit nerve-wracking as a native actor, and it was the first, like, really big studio film that I'd been called into so specifically. So, then after the locals casting process had happened, which had turned up actors who played very key Osage historical roles in it outside of the sisters, and actually really shaped the film after that. I did my first sides read. I did a self-tape and then was brought back in for notes. And I remember back then, actors in here, you kind of know when you're getting dummy sides. I had that moment where I was like, God, I hope these are dummy sides, because they were very well written, but it was a 3-page heavy dialogue scene between Molly and Ernest, where Molly had long monologues where she kind of names all of her family in one go. You get, like, a sense of her and Ernest's relationship in one interaction, and it felt like a very tertiary character to me. And it was also not the Molly that I had read in the book. It was not the Molly that I had felt thinking about just who Native women at that point in history were, just stories about my own grandmother, or great-grandmother, and I'm named after my great-grandmother Lily, who would have been a contemporary of Molly. They were only 10 years apart in age. But when I got the new sides, almost a year later, suddenly they were actionable in the way that I understood Molly could be, and in the way that I understand what I'm able to do on stage and what I'm able to do on screen. It's like I know I've got kind of tricks for both, and I could see how I could, like, unpack my screen acting toolbox into these new sides, and also just felt like a more fully developed character. It's like, okay, this is a scene that feels like a flavor of what their relationship is going to be, so that told me that she was going to be main character, and that completely changed the audition process, which at that point just ended up being reading directly with Marty once, and then that led to a meeting with Marty and Leo that went over about an hour. We were scheduled for an hour, but we just talked the whole time. Had my sides next to me the whole time, just expecting that this is also going to be the chem read. And then a couple weeks passes, Leo's shooting Don't Look Up and is saying, yeah, let's get back into this and read sides and, like, really test this out. So in my head, I'm like, okay, we're going to do a chem read. So when the next call came in on December 1st, 2020, I was expecting that it was scheduling that, but it was the offer, because Marty was just so clear that he saw what he needed. And the best part of it all, and stop me if you've already heard this because I say it a lot, but December 1st when I got the offer, it turns out was Molly Burkhart's birthday. And no one's design. Maybe Molly's design.
Seems that way. So I want to talk to you a little bit about research. And I read that Martin had said that you met with the Osage and came to him with questions and ideas. So I'm wondering what you learned from the Osage community in your research, which you passed to Martin, hoping that he would use it, and then how did he use what you gave him?
I mean, Marty was just open to the whole process. Anytime someone who was Osage had something to say, it would usually change the script. And I went a little extracurricular. Like, I really, really praised Sekelia for the fact that they sent producers out a year ahead of when any talent or anybody else from production arrived, just to build relationships with community. So when I got there, people were familiar with the presence that we were bringing into the community. And there were a lot of meetings set up, and I met a lot of new people. But I had Osage friends just from being in the community. It's this kind of dual thing, like when somebody's like finds out you're Native, they're like, oh, do you know this person? And then it's like you're waiting to be like, oh my God, we don't all know each other. And then they'll say the person, and you're like, oh yeah, I do know them. It's just a joke in Indian country. It's like 2 degrees of separation instead of 7. But yeah, I had Osage friends from work prior that I got in touch with, and one particularly, Wilson Pipestem, is a brilliant lawyer who's done a lot of work for a lot of different aspects of Indian country. I got to know him because of his work with the Violence Against Women Act and getting the Native provisions re-signed on those. There was a play reading that went along with that, but anyways, Wilson shared stories of his grandmother Rose, which was so valuable because in talking with Wilson, I was able to give myself permission to lean into a lot of the instincts I had from stories of my grandmother Lily. Both Native women from about the same time. Rose would have been about the same age as Grandma Lily. But Osage and Blackfeet are different. There's 574 federally recognized tribes in the United States and several hundred others that are not federally recognized, either state or self-recognized. But we have different languages, we have different histories. It's like we're very diverse. Washington State alone has more tribal nations than Europe has countries. So the difference, it was a big thing. I was really trying hard not to apply a Blackfeet perspective to Osage history, but being the fact that Rose Pipestem was a traditional Osage woman and very Catholic, and Grandma Lily was the same. She was very Catholic and very Native, spoke her language. The more I visited with Wilson, the more I just kept hearing stories that sounded like Grandma Lily. So that was nice. But then Wilson also offered these stories that Grandma Rose had, and the credits that you just watched, it really moved me the first time that I saw the film that they chose the rain, kind of harkening back to that moment where Molly puts the blanket on and like slows things down and sits and explains how powerful the storm is. That was what Rose used to do. That scene had originally ended in the script with Molly and Ernest basically taking whiskey shots together, and Ernest and Molly drinking Ernest under the table. Community said that wouldn't have been Molly, that maybe would have been Anna, but it wouldn't have been Molly. So Wilson, with his understanding of how the community knew Molly, offered this story from his grandma Rose, and he offered it to Marty directly too, which was giving both Marty and Wilson and everybody else credit. We offered what we could as actors when we picked these things up. But yeah, Wilson told that story and Marty immediately changed that scene. And then I think it's just really lovely after you've been so bowled over by this film and so, just beaten down by this storm, and have a moment to just kind of sit and reflect on it. I learned about Augusto Boal in Theater of the Oppressed, which was kind of grown from Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed. which is, you know, if an oppressed population owns the means, not the means of their own production, but their own educational system and their own way of learning and understanding the world, then they can shape it better. So TO, Theater of the Oppressed, branched from the same things, and ironically, a lot of it borrowed from indigenous gameplay. Like TO exercises are very based on Augusto Boal, spending a lot of time in indigenous communities in Brazil. And it's kind of funny is he started his workout with, he admitted this later.
That's high praise, I think, from Leonardo DiCaprio.
Oh yeah, his improvs are so funny. There's some scenes in the film that I still haven't seen, because when it comes up, I just remember what it was like shooting it. I just laugh too hard. But yeah, Leo's a brilliant improviser, and he and I found a natural rhythm with that so quickly. I can't imagine how much Thelma didn't include in the film, because I remember just how much we would just keep going. Yeah, that was wonderful. Like the discovery of Shomikasi, coyote, came from my language teacher, Chris Cote. And I had two. Chris, I always say, laid the foundation for me, and then Janice Carpenter, who taught me women's dialect, because even within this language that I don't speak, and is very, very different than any tribal language that I'm comfortable speaking, there's even different dialects between genders. So when I had an Osage woman teaching me how to say it, you know, she helped me put the window dressings on. But Chris Cote in our early lessons was also giving me stories and helping me like understand Osage worldview. Because I told him that early on. It's like I don't want to put a Blackfeet tent on an Osage character. So like I'm just here to learn. But one thing that we had in common, I was raised hearing trickster stories, and Chris would share trickster stories with me because he teaches his students. He will tell them a trickster story because a lot of times, especially when you're telling them to kids, they're really funny and they're entertaining. It's a little bit Looney Tunes-ish, you know, like Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner, I guess you can maybe argue. It's kind of how they sound. But he was also illustrating just how animated Osage language is, which is something he and I talked about, both being of the same generation, that films depict us as being so stoic, but we know how like boisterous and funny we are. So he would tell me these trickster stories in Osage language first, so I could see how animated the language was when you speak it, which ultimately is where I found Molly most. And at her most comfortable, obviously, would be in her first language, but it's when she's able to be most expressive. And that scene was definitely the one with the sisters, too. But when Chris told me the Shomikasi story, this coyote story, you know, we vetted it heavily because a lot of these stories are not for outsiders, but this one was one that was okay. It's been published and it's shared with outsiders quite a bit. But I immediately like drew it to my own tribal trickster stories I was raised with, and then suddenly I found Molly's blind spot for Ernest to hide in. That when she calls him Coyote, she's not just calling him the animal, she's calling him this trickster figure. Coyote is in Osage oral tradition. They have many trickster figures, some are more sinister. Coyote, still getting used to that coyote is how we say it in Montana. Anyway, he's like the fop, you know, he's the one who's always, you know, hedonistic, fun-loving, self-serving, you know, makes the party during the night and sleeps all day, as, you know, Ernest admits in that. It's like immediately. But it's always very